dark silhouette, huge propellers, an airplane fuselage, stealth capabilities, a whole bunch of the latest technologies, and record-breaking flight speeds. Fighting for the title of one of the main American helicopters of the future, this machine has absorbed everything that the futurist could come up with. Hello aviators, Sky here, and today we have something very interesting. I present to you the Sikorsky Boeing SB-1 Defiant. Rotorcraft birds are everywhere. Helicopters have long won their place in the sky, becoming cooler in every aspect. Except for one: helicopters are slow. And the main problem of limiting their speed in the design itself is that at too high speeds the main rotor, half of which rotates along the flight path and the second half in the opposite direction, loses the balance of lift and starts going crazy. As a result, it turns out that a helicopter, no matter how cool it is, will simply lose its ability to fly at a certain speed. They tried to solve this problem for a long time, and now we have two ways before us. The first way is a tiltrotor. Its concept is that when flying at low speeds, the rotors are directed upwards like a helicopter, but when accelerating they turn 90 degrees, thereby turning from carrying to pulling like on an airplane. The second is an elegant way to deal with physics using a coaxial scheme. The problem of rotor lift imbalance remains, but since there are now two rotors and they rotate in opposite directions, as a result we get a stable picture. Sikorsky, one of the world's leading helicopter companies, has been exploring this concept since the 1970s, and the XH-59 helicopter, also known as the S-69, became an important stage in this search. An unusual thing, a 4-ton machine with two coaxial propellers and two jet engines. Two prototypes were created, the first of which was quickly broken, while the second one was decently tested. The speeds were impressive. It accelerated to 238 knots, and in a small dive, right up to 263 knots. For understanding, the AH-64 Apache flies at speeds of around 160 knots. But the price of these figures was high. The helicopter was difficult to control, the rotors were subjected to high loads and vibrations, and the fuel was burning in frantic quantities. Two jet engines did their job. By the beginning of the 1980s, test flights were completed, and the program in general too. The prototype went to the museum, and the concept to the shelf. It was taken off the shelf in the 21st century. Technology has come a long way: economical engines, composite blades, fly-by-wire, computers. The bonuses of progress could well solve the problems of the XH-59 and make its concept quite real. This is how the Sikorsky X-2 appeared. The X-2 is a logical successor to the XH-59, with a similar coaxial rotor, but with a pusher propeller instead of jet engines. A series of test flights began in 2008 and was carried out quite successfully. All elements of the system showed themselves very well. The speeds were also in place. In test flights, the X-2 accelerated to 250 knots in level flight, and up to 260 knots in a small dive. Not much more than the old XH-59, but much more efficiently and comfortably. The X-2 prototype gave helicopter builders a lot of useful knowledge and proved that the concept is complex but achievable. Sikorsky plucked up courage and announced new projects that already aim at full-fledged implementation and conquering the sky. The Future Vertical Lift, or FVL, is a huge and multifaceted program initiated by the Pentagon to create a new generation of helicopters of different classes, from light reconnaissance vehicles to attack vehicles and heavy transports. Each class has its own sub-program. One of them was FARA, Future Attack Reconnaissance Aircraft, whose task was to replace old light helicopters, and in which Sikorsky presented the S-97 Raider project. A 5-ton helicopter that has all the solutions of the X-2 prototype and has excellent flight performance, including a speed of about 220 knots. Cool thing, but we're not talking about it today. The second program, Future Long Range Assault Aircraft, also known as FLRAA, involves the creation of a medium army transport, which by 2030 will have to replace the UH-60 Black Hawk. Already a cult machine, flying in huge numbers in the United States and a couple of dozen other countries, the air must be worthy. The military, knowing this very well, set rather stringent requirements. They need not just a slightly better replacement, they need a machine that can take more cargo and people on board, fly much farther and faster, cruise speed 250 knots at minimum. The UH-60 squeezes out about 160 knots. Naturally, it immediately became clear that an ordinary helicopter simply could not handle such conditions. The task for aircraft manufacturers is a difficult one, but winning the FLRAA tender promises decades of production and gigantic contracts. Representatives of two main concepts entered the stage: the new Bell tiltrotor and the new Sikorsky coaxial helicopter. And the history of the newest brainchild of Sikorsky began with the realization that on their own and in parallel with the S-97 Raider, they would not be able to pull off such a project. By the mid-2010s, the company had serious financial problems, and in 2015 it was absorbed by Lockheed Martin. The new owners immediately stepped up to work and also found a strategic partner, Boeing. It's funny how two aerospace corporations manage to go hand in hand on some projects and bite each other's throats on others. Even funnier is the fact that until 2015, Lockheed Martin partnered with Bell on their tiltrotor project, taking an active part in the creation of, in fact, their current competitor. Yeah, if you change dragons for jets in the Game of Thrones, you get the American military industry. In any case, the project was initiated in 2015 and received the SB-1 index, that is, Sikorsky Boeing, and the name, Defiant. In accordance with the terms of the tender, the team was supposed to create a demonstrator for the future helicopter. Despite the fact that the X-2 gave a serious base, the work was still difficult. The first full-fledged prototype was presented in 2018. So, the SB-1 Defiant is the successor to the X-2 concept, a coaxial double main rotor design on top and a pusher propeller in the tail. The dimensions are not officially published, however Sikorsky emphasizes that replacing the Black Hawk with the Defiant will not require rebuilding the infrastructure since they are close in overall dimensions. The SB-1's fuselage is larger, but the relatively small rotors and layout make it more compact, if you don't count the height. I would dare to suggest that the total length, including propellers, is slightly longer than that of the UH-60, somewhere around 20 meters. The maximum takeoff weight of the helicopter is at the level of 13.6, 14 tons, about a third heavier than the Black Hawk. The shape of the fuselage takes into account more stringent aerodynamic requirements. It is quite long and streamlined, and unlike conventional helicopters, it doesn't actually have a tail boom. The design smoothly narrows and rests against the pusher propeller. The tail unit is very advanced, a hefty horizontal stabilizer, 2 fins, plus a large ventral fin from below. The tail has control devices, horizontal elevators, and vertical, all-moving consoles of the fins. They did not save on composites here either. Propeller blades, tail elements, fairings, and almost the entire fuselage are made of them. The landing gear of the helicopter is probably the most common part of it. 3 legs with a small wheel on each one. The main gear is located in the central part of the fuselage. In flight it retracts inside. The tail leg rests against the ventral fin. The interior layout is reminiscent of the Black Hawk. The cockpit, the main cabin behind it, 2 windows for observation and placement of weapons, followed by a pair of sliding doors on both sides. The Defiant can take on board up to 12 equipped paratroopers or up to 8 stretchers for the wounded, plus a crew of 4, 2 pilots, 2 crew chiefs or gunners. The available volume is approximately 50% larger than that of the UH-60, which makes the work and accommodation of troops much more convenient. An astute observer may notice that the SB-1's capacity figures are not that much better than the UH-60's, given that the new helicopter is much larger than the old one. The point is in the layout. The equipment, fuel system and the power plant are very large and take up a lot of space. A price for power and flight performance. The helicopter is capable of carrying up to 1,670 kilograms of cargo inside the cabin. It can also carry cargo on an external sling, but so far no official characteristics. In the presentation images, the Defiant is carrying howitzers, believed to be the 155mm M777, which weighs approximately 4,200 kilograms. The cockpit has 2 seats. On the outside, it looks more like that of an airplane, streamlined outlines, white glazing, but without lower windows near the legs. The avionics apparently are also experimental. The interface, most likely the brainchild of Collins Aerospace, which is created for promising helicopters, in addition to standard instruments, has a pair of widescreen multifunction displays, as well as several small touch displays on the central dashboard and pedestal. The controls are fly-by-wire. In addition, in 2022, it was announced that the control system of the future Defiant X, which we will talk about later, will receive the Paragon computer, also from Collins, which claims its place in a variety of new systems, from drones to 6th-generation fighters. Each of the 2 SB-1 rotors is equipped with 4 rigid composite blades and has a relatively small diameter, allowed by the additional thrust of the coaxial layout. The rotation speed is adjustable. The mechanism is equipped with an active vibration suppression system, and for better aerodynamics and less radar visibility, the bushings and the rotor hub are covered with fairings. It looks terribly bulky, but helps in work. The pusher propeller is 8-bladed. It is controlled independently. In a normal helicopter flight, it can remain disabled and joins in with acceleration. At the same time, the pitch control allows it to be used as a brake, as turboprop aircraft can do. A useful feature in a dangerous zone that you need to quickly fly into and just as quickly get out of. The power plant, of course, is unusual. On the one hand, the coaxial scheme does not require the installation of a tail rotor, but in its place there is now a pusher propeller, so there are still transmission elements with a shaft leading to the tail. On the SB-1 prototype, the fiery heart is a pair of Honeywell T55 turboshaft engines with about 5,000 horsepower each. A classic engine, the same as installed on the CH-47 Chinook. It should be noted that the T55 is not planned as a standard for the Defiant. Planned engines for the new generation have much better performance, but they are not yet ready. And in the case of the SB-1, we are talking about a prototype, and the reliable T55 made it possible not to wait for the new engines and reduce risks during testing. This solution also has a price. The T55 is outdated, not efficient, economical, or powerful enough. And immediately a question. 2 5,000 horsepower engines on a 14-ton helicopter, and you think it's not enough? Modern helicopters close in class need much smaller numbers. One of the nuances of this scheme is that in order to maintain flight at high speeds, it requires lots of power, which will still play its role. The SB-1 Defiant made its maiden flight on March 21, 2019 at the Sikorsky site in West Palm Beach, Florida, and began the active phase of tests, which were supposed to confirm the calculated performance and demonstrate the promise of the Sikorsky and Boeing concept. The testing was quite thorough. Given a number of innovations, everything had to be checked, including extreme conditions and durability. As part of these tests, for example, the SB-1 was brought to a normal flight at a speed of about 100 knots, and then one of the engines was stopped. The aircraft would continue to fly and make successful landings. Defiant also conducted a series of tests for the transport of oversized cargo on an external sling. The first large payload was a pod containing 6 GM-LRS missiles weighing 2.4 tons. Such pods are used on American MLRS, like HIMARS and M270. The next test was shipping at high speed. The helicopter took a load weighing 1.5 tons on a sling and accelerated with it to a speed of 100 knots while performing maneuvers. Another series of tests was supposed to show the ability of the helicopter to perform its main task as a military transport. Controllability at low speeds, hovering performance, acceleration, braking, and so on were checked. The SB-1 proved to be excellent here. It is larger and heavier than the Black Hawk, but the capabilities of the layout and the latest control systems did their job. Curiously, the helicopter turned out to be relatively quiet in flight, and also, when hovering at low altitudes, it creates much weaker vortices that look cool on the screen, but terribly interfere in practice. Of course, the main theme of the tests was speed. There were many acceleration tests, and the helicopter was showing better and better performance with each one, reaching a peak of 247 knots, almost 100 knots more than the speed of the UH-60. And this is where the problems begin. The Defiant is great in the role of a helicopter, but when it comes to more airplane roles, primarily speed and range, it starts to fall behind. 247 knots is cool, no doubt. It can even meet the minimum requirements. But these are the minimum requirements. The FLR-AA tender for the US Army has a desired speed of 280 knots, and the Marines even want more than 300. In addition, the helicopter has obvious problems with the range. In high-speed flight, fuel consumption is very high, which greatly impairs this indicator. Sikorsky and Boeing, describing this problem, refer to the shortcomings of the old engine, which is both not powerful enough and too voracious. It is quite possibly the case, and the new turboshaft engines that are now being created for future helicopters will be able to solve this problem. Possibly. Or possibly the X2 concept itself, although seriously superior to the usual helicopter designs, is still limited in terms of peak performance. In addition, even when testing the X2 prototype, the limited scaling was obvious. The larger the helicopter of such a scheme, the more difficult it will be for it. The Defiant is already almost the limit, and for tenders for larger vehicles, Sikorsky no longer offers the X2 concept, but classics like the CH-53K. Nevertheless, despite all the difficulties, they are trying to solve the shortcomings of the SB-1. In 2021, Sikorsky and Boeing officially presented the Defiant X. This is already a full-fledged prototype that can find its direct continuation in the serial production. In addition, if the program is successful, Boeing and Sikorsky proposed the creation of a new attack helicopter that could replace the AH-64 Apache. The helicopter is distinguished by a combat configuration of the fuselage with a different cabin and suspensions of weapons, while remaining unified with the Defiant, duplicating most of the elements and systems. The Defiant X has slightly changed fuselage outlines, becoming a little rougher and sharper in places. This should reinforce the structure and reduce radar visibility, as much as it is possible for a helicopter with 3 propellers. The landing gear configuration has changed. Now there is a classic tricycle one, with a front swivel leg and 2 wheels on each gear. The tail leg, however, remained. The empennage remained almost the same, only the fins changed shape, becoming swept. The fairings of the power plant have also changed. The hump behind the rotor goes smoothly into the tail and makes you wonder, where is the exhaust? The SB-1 nozzles disappeared, and in order to hide the thermal trail of the helicopter were replaced. Apparently, they were replaced with a special system for removing gas and mixing it with air, similar to the one that was on the Air AH-66 Comanche. The main change is in the power plant. The old T-55 turbofans have given way to the latest HTC 7500, which Honeywell built on the T-55 base, but with a huge amount of innovation. According to the company, the engine has become 42% more powerful and 18% more economical than its predecessor, about 7,500 horsepower. Monstrous power for a helicopter of this mass. Apparently, the creators of the SB-1 decided to fill up all the problems with horsepower. Even so, the SB-1's problems don't seem fundamentally unsolvable, and the Defiant X could prove to be a good vehicle to meet the demands of the military. Everything would be fine if the concept of a coaxial high-speed helicopter did not have the competing tiltrotor concept, and the Defiant did not have the Valor. While the brainchild of Sikorsky is more of a helicopter than a plane, the brainchild of Bell is more of a plane than a helicopter. In this video, I won't go into details about the V-280, but its results speak for themselves. Yes, it is larger, and in a number of parameters probably inferior to the SB-1, but in terms of speed and range it is noticeably ahead, and meets the requirements of the military now, and not in the promised future versions. The result of this comment was summed up by the military. At the end of 2022, the FLRAA Program Commission announced the winner of the tender, Bell Textron Corporation and their V-280 Valor tiltrotor. Sikorsky and Boeing are now trying to challenge the decision of the military and are looking for new solutions so that the Defiant find its place in the world. It would be a shame if the finale of such a large-scale work would be just another museum exhibit. In addition, its brother Raider is still fighting for the fairer tender with another Bell brainchild, Invictus. Who will win there is still unknown. Well, the battle of helicopters for speed continues, and let's hope that the concept created by Sikorsky 50 years ago will still become the core of future high-speed vehicles, military or maybe even civilian. The history of these machines will continue, but it's time for today's video to end. Comment what you think about the Defiant, like and subscribe to the channel. And if you want to watch the videos early, see some exclusive behind-the-scenes content, or just support the channel, consider joining our Patreon community. Fast flights on exotic helicopters and soft landings to you.